So I kind of covered the agenda, so let's just dive right into it, right? Why are we all here? Because we all have lots of data. It all starts with data, and it's everywhere. And what I mean by that is you take this data and you use it to represent different concepts within your business. Whether it's an asset, whether it's an entity, it's a customer, it's a product, whatever it is, there's lots of data about that particular entity. And it's coming from everywhere. So it's either internally generated, or it's externally generated, or it's a combination of both. Especially in the oil and gas space, you can talk about production numbers from your own wells that are coming internally, maybe your competitors' wells that are coming from the state, or coming from external sources. So how do you put all that stuff together and make it reference the same thing, so everybody's talking about the same thing with the same data? Right? And that's a big problem today. Additionally, if you're talking about an asset has a life cycle. So let's say an asset is a well, and that well moves through its various states, right? So before you drill a well, you acquire a lease, you select where the well is going to go, you drill it, you complete it, you produce it, you sell it, you shut it in, right? It's got a life cycle. Customers have a life cycle as well. You've acquired them, they've purchased, they're purchasing a lot, they're declining, they're no longer a customer, you're trying to get them back as a customer. So the idea here is that these different assets that we're talking about, they move through different departments within the organizations, and each department has kind of locally optimized around how do they best do their job in their information system. And so that information that you really need to get at to make a better decision about that asset is locked up. And so we call those, of course, data silos. Right? And additionally, as you have more assets to manage or the organization grows, data gets harder to find and it gets harder to manage. And so this is what kind of the setup is to why we would want to talk about master data management. So talk a little bit about data silos. And specifically, you have organizations where you have a line of business system, and maybe it's a production accounting system, maybe it's a drilling system, maybe it's a land management system. And somebody's got to go figure out, in the case of, say, a lease compliance situation, am I drilling enough to hold this lease? Am I producing enough to hold this lease without having to pay penalties on it? Well, I got to go reach into somebody else's system from a different department. I'm not trained for it. I don't have the licenses for it. So how do we get to that data? So this is where we say data is locked up in all of these different silos, and users don't have access to that data through those systems. And then we move on to, okay, so now we figured out a way to get to that data. Somebody's going to generate a report for us. They give us an Excel file. So when we get that, there's a manual process that has to occur. Somebody goes and compiles the data, coalesces it, makes it reference the same asset, makes it reference the same entity. Notice that process then generates a report, but it's a manual process with humans involved. Inevitably, humans make mistakes. So when you get the data, the report the first time, and you get the report the second time, maybe there's an inconsistency. So then you start to look at, is this data even right? And do I trust the data that I'm being given? And can I go reproduce this process? So we say, okay, well, we'll do something different. We'll automate it. But that's a one-off kind of automation to pull these different data, these different pieces of data from all these different sources and try to put them together in a report. And if I'm doing that one-off every single time, it begins to get expensive and it begins to get hard to maintain. And so there's a problem around that. So what we create there is kind of suspicions around the data. If I have to make a decision based on this data and I can't consistently reproduce the reports that I'm going to use to make these decisions, am I going to trust my decision? Am I trusting the data? And so that's where we get into trust issues. Okay, so why does this really matter? Basically, you're going to have three likely outcomes from any one of these kind of symptoms that I've described. Increased exposure to risk, missed revenue opportunities, and unnecessary costs. So let's break those down specifically. We're going to take risk and go into business and financial risk, acquisitions, divestitures, and regulatory compliance. In each of those situations, not having access to data, having access to data that maybe is inaccurate or is untimely, creates exposure to any one of these risks. And we define business and financial risks as, the company has a cost target or a revenue target that they need to hit. If I have poor data and I'm making decisions about how we're going to run the business based on that data, I'm not going to hit those targets. Okay. Next item, missed revenue opportunities. Not understanding true costs and therefore not pricing appropriately. So So this is especially true in the case of if you're manufacturing widgets or you're providing a service. And so take an example where we have work orders that are going out for field service work. Those work orders are executed by an individual. That individual, their information is their payroll information is being tracked in an HR system. The work orders are coming out of an operations system. So how do I get accurate job costing back into an accounting system when all of that information is dispersed? So now how do I know the price appropriately? Am I really making money there? Could I be making more money if I could adjust the pricing appropriately? And then lastly, not understanding your true output of production. So a really good example here is when we go back to production numbers on wells. All right? So if I have an NRI change, right? So this net royalty interest piece, when that change occurs, that gets reflected in one system. It may not get reflected in another system. So am I getting the right payout? Am I being paid correctly when this NRI change has occurred? And this is a common problem that we find in most E&P companies. So tracking that information back, executing that division of interest, process and procedure, making it touch all the right systems, that is a good problem that creates a revenue shortage. Okay, and then we talk about true cost. So there are costs here associated with looking for data. So Gartner, Accenture, McKinsey, they go out and they do all of these studies and they talk about how much time does an average information worker spend looking for data, and what is the percentage of time that data is actually accurate. So they say at a minimum it's about 2 hours a day that you're spending looking for data. And when you find the data, 40 to 60% of the time it's actually inaccurate. So now you're spending even more time looking for that data. So there are costs associated with that in terms of productivity. They're kind of mushy numbers, but you figure that time is the most important thing that you have, and people are, in general, a very expensive kind of asset to pay. It goes into your expense side of your income statements. And then you go into other productivity costs that I alluded to earlier. So manually transforming data. So I'm going to go pull this data from another system. I'm going to transform it. I'm going to generate a report, or I'm going to transform it and stick it into yet another system. So that is also an expensive process because again it takes time, and it's also error prone, especially if it's a manual process. So all of those create operational inefficiencies, increased costs, and that is a risk associated with having all this data everywhere.
I might add one other thing on the cost side. We talked about kind of the human side of cost in terms of inefficiencies there, but if you think about a physical plant, whether it's a well site, pipeline, refinery, manufacturing facility, processing facility of some sort, you think about your equipment. Imagine having conflicting inaccurate data about when the last time maintenance was performed, or who the right service vendors are for that equipment, or where are you on the purchase order for this type of physical activities in the field. A lot of times we find that, especially with physical things, because people think we have to go out and touch it. I know that this bulldozer is here, that they don't very good tracking the information related to that physical asset, and oftentimes it's in documents and spreadsheets and in this legacy system, and it was updated when we bought the thing. Someone put it in. Even when they're dutiful to get the information into a system, it oftentimes isn't maintained throughout the physical life cycle of that physical asset. So asset-related data, and physical asset-related data, in addition to the people costs usually from a productivity or a risk perspective.
Right.
Hey, I was made this decision based on a bad number, right? I chose to do something or not to do something, or I didn't think to worry about something because I had some bad data, because the right answer was actually available in the company, but it was over here where I didn't either know to look or didn't have access to, or it hadn't been updated in the system that I use on a day-to-day basis. And that's the type of unforeseen costs that come as a result of the general data quality issue. And then they'll hand it back to Chad to talk about how does master data management plug that back together.
Okay, so this statement up here is very true, and so now the question is, how do we fix it? So this is where we talk about what master data management does and brings to the table. So what is it? So it's bringing you a consistent view of the assets and the entities that we care about, the customers, the vendors, the employees, any one of the other assets, the physical assets that Nate was even talking about. What we do with master data management is we establish systems of record for these different pieces of data and data owners. So we talk about application owners, and then we also talk about what is a data steward or a data manager. Right? And so what we do with master data management is we look to assign not only who owns the application, but who owns the quality of the information in the application. And then what we try to do is also create single points of data input. So a really great example is API numbers for wells. It's maintained in different systems. If I go do a pull of all the API numbers from the different systems, those are formatted differently. And because they're formatted differently, when we go generate the reports, we get multiple wells. We have more wells in the system than we actually have out in the field. And I can't correlate information back and forth. So we try to minimize the amount of data input that occurs because, again, it's done by humans, and humans inevitably make mistakes. So it's a combination of technology and process. It's not just a technology solution. It can't be, right? So the question was, how do we get users to adopt it? And there's a process and a human component of this that also needs to be put into account. And so when we talk about process, it's business process management and it's data governance. And when we talk about technology, we talk about things like master data models and data virtualization, which is a way to not have a centralized store where everything is copied into, but create kind of a services layer on top of it so it feels and looks like a single data repository, but the data is actually being extracted in real time on an as-needed basis. Right? And then you have service-oriented architectures that sit on top of that as well. Okay, so what are the big benefits here? So I'm not going to read this to you, but I am going to highlight this part on the bottom of where we go from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. So data is just that. It's numbers. It's numbers about things. Information is what you glean out of the data. Knowledge is what you're trying to acquire about the things that you've got data and information about. So what are you going to do about that particular thing? The numbers are coming in low on the production side. Why? How are we going to analyze that data statistically? And that's where we're getting into knowledge. And then wisdom is essentially what everybody's looking for at the end of the day, which is, I have the wisdom to make a decision based on the information that's here, and now I've built up all of this experience. But to get to information and knowledge, we need to get a handle on the data. And so a couple of things that I do want to highlight here is that master data management is the foundation for business intelligence. So it is not to say that you can't go do business intelligence without master data management, but you're going to get a bigger return on your business intelligence investment if you've got data that is apples and apples as opposed to apples and oranges.
So if you think about, just to expand on that analogy, if you think about, hey, we want to go correlate the cost data that we have over here with the revenue data that we have over here, and the thing that ties it together is some sort of asset identifier, right? Whether it's a well or a plant or a piece of machinery, whatever it is. We want to correlate some disparate pieces of data so that we can make some business decisions, analyze it. Ultimately, data is about letting people make better decisions, and software is just the conduit between the people and the data. So good software lets people make better decisions based on the data you already have in your business. So it's not about, we're as consultants not in the business of creating new data or giving you another place to store things. What we want to say is you have all this information already in your business to make the better decisions that you want to make. But it's the access, the software gap is the piece that's not letting the people connect with the right information. And so you think about BI, you think about the idea of okay, so business intelligence might be a dashboard where we bring this correlated data together into one place. Well, you can build a dashboard on top of one system, like a BI type dashboard. You don't have to worry about how does it correlate with third-party data, but to sort of take it to the next level where we're actually trending and analyzing data from multiple areas of the company in one sort of experience. That's where, if you can't correlate the entity, right, the noun part, what we call master data, Then the transactional data, which is all the quantitative stuff, like how much did it cost, how much did it produce, what was the dollars and cents associated to it, over what period of time, and
How often
slicing
did it
and
occur?
dicing. That's where the transactional data. You can't ever stitch that stuff together if you don't have the connector right. Right, and that's really where there's a secondary payoff, not just in having clean data, but being able to bring the transactional data together.
Okay, so that leads us to how do we get started? And what we do here is lay out kind of 9 different steps that we would go take to execute on a project like this. But where it really starts is identifying a business goal. One of the common things that we see as consultants is we'll get pulled into a project and we'll say, okay, well, we're going to do master data management. Great. Why are we doing master data management? Well, because it's a thing to do. Because I got the budget, we're going to go do it.
I went to this conference. They said this is what I should be doing this year.
Right. We're going to do business process automation. We're going to do, we're going to do workflows. Right. Why are we doing these things? How is it tied back to some business goal, some business initiative? Without this tie back, it's harder to calculate or express or convey what is a return on the investment here. So we ask the questions of, is this related to generating more revenue? Is it reducing costs? Are we trying to do customer satisfaction? Whatever it may be, right? Or even in the oil and gas space, is it better manage leases so that we know if we're compliant with the leases that we have? Are we exposing ourselves to risk or reducing payouts? Whatever that is, that's what we're looking for. And that's the first place to start. It's also the first place to start when you are looking to get budget for it. And so we also work with clients to say, okay, well, we need to develop a business case for it so that we can go get budget, and now we need to understand, okay, what are the initiatives that are on the table for the organization? Let's see how we can tie this together.
So a lot of times, IT is only brought in at the level of, we need to correlate this data, go get us some, figure that out. But never the why. Like, why do we need to correlate this data, right? What is the impact? What's the so what? After we correlate this data, what will be different about our company, right? And that might be called a business case. It might be called requirements. It might be called, any consulting, business analysis, right? And it goes by any different name. But a lot of times, you see the role of IT needs to be elevated to the purpose of this project as opposed to just the tactics of how to execute it, right? And they're in a better place to deliver the right solution versus something that's overkill or something that's underbaked, half-baked. It doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't really deliver on the why. So if you're not involved in the business reality of the decision, it's going to be hard to bring the right tool because the bottom line is there's a whole spectrum. Interesting that you have a spectrum there. A whole spectrum of possibilities on how to solve this from very lightweight type things that are more reporting based. Hey, here's a conflict, and then you just go fix it in the systems. To things that are actively managing and syncing data, which are much more heavyweight type gear.
Thanks for pointing out the spectrum. That's the kind of the roadmap. So there's 9 steps here. We don't want to lose you, so you kind of get a sense of where you are in the process here. But this is where we start, and this is ideally where you would start as well. Okay, so you've now figured out what your business case is, and now you ask the question: what are the key business entities that drive that business case? What are those things that we care about? It's not the transactions, right? So we talked about the difference between transactions. It's the nouns. It's the things. Is it people? Okay. Are those people employees? Are those people contractors? Are we doing a cost management? Those are vendors. So we need to make sure that our information about vendors is correct. Invoices. So what are those nouns that we care about? We're going to call those our key entities. That's what we're going to use and manage as master data. And what that means is we're going to manage metadata about those nouns. So if it's a well, what's its state? When was it drilled?
Name. Something as simple as
a name. Yeah, name.
It's huge.
It's location. Why location? It's got to show up on a map somewhere. Where are we going to store that?
Right.
So things like hierarchy, how it's related to other nouns that we care about. Version, meaning that it's changing. It's going through its life cycle. As it's going through its life cycle, we have to look at the audit trails. Who made those changes? When were those changes made? And then lastly is quality control. So with the auditing and with the process around that, then we can get some quality control around who's actually making changes to the data and when they're making those changes. Okay. Next step is identifying who owns that data. So we're talking about this in terms of who is the data steward. You call it data steward, you call it data manager, but it's taking that concept of application manager or application owner and giving them some responsibility over owning the actual quality, the timeliness, the formatting, the input of that data into the system that they're managing.
This is another question where that lightweight, heavyweight, it becomes important, right? So you can look at a fully staffed data management solution where you have data stewards that specialize. You know, if you went and looked at what does Conoco do for data management, okay? They have 40 people that are data managers, and each one of them specializes in a particular entity, and there's probably multiple of them based on different asset geographies, right? So there's multiple well data stewards that handle wells in the North Sea versus wells in Southeast Asia versus wells onshore in the U.S., right? And they're sort of the chiefs of keeping the quality on that particular entity up to par. So when there's a conflict, they get a notification, they go into the system, they look at what it is, they decide who the winner is, they click go, it pushes it back out, right? And then that's the data steward's role. So again, you don't want to go in with a heavy-handed approach, like maybe you're not in a position to hire 3 data stewards, right? You may not want to go and invest in a solution that's really not going to deliver the value without the steward, right? If it requires someone at the wheel piloting the data quality on an active sort of engaged process, that might not be the right approach to you for your scale or needs or whatever. It may be some other lighter weight approach, but in the event that you do have this data steward, you know, it's important to think about what are they really responsible for doing.
And there's a philosophy that says everybody in the organization should be a data steward. Every user of the system should be a data steward. Well, the only way to have that occur is to bring visibility to what is it that they are responsible for. So audit reports that go out on a regular basis for people to check quality of the data. Exception reports when information doesn't match up. That's the only way to get this kind of meet that philosophy of everybody is a steward. Outside of that, assigning it to a user, assigning it to an individual, even if it's the application owner, with the same kind of technology support, you know, these types of reports, is another way to achieve it. And you've got this, again, this spectrum of ways that you could solve it. But the point is that somebody's got to own the quality of the data. Okay, the next is identifying your business processes that rely or manipulate this master data. So what is the process for entering the information about when a well is drilled? Who owns that in terms of the department? And how is that impacted as the asset moves through the departments? Who gets to update that information? So another great example is looking at, again, we're going to go back to the E&P space where we look at different systems that are tracking the asset. Each one of them has a different spud date. Okay, well, spud date's super important because I got to tie it back to this lease where I've got drilling provisions, and if I missed the drilling provision because I missed it by a month because it was inaccurate, when actually I did drill it within the provisions, I might be paying out when I shouldn't be paying out. Right? And so looking at how this data is flowing through the departments for that asset and what they're tacking on, what attributes are being tacked on as it goes through the individual departments, right? That's the metadata. It's the information about the noun that we care about, and that's going to also drive the next set of steps, which is creating a data model. Okay, so this one is about looking at the different systems that we're using to track the data and figuring out a way to map it. Okay? And the idea here is that depending on the type of software that we're looking at, sometimes it'll be easy to integrate it because there'll be a nice services layer and we can have applications talk to each other through the services layer. And sometimes, and this is the majority of the case, we have to actually have the databases talk to each other. The databases don't talk to each other, we have to introduce an intermediary. And there's a couple of ways to do that. And one is technology-centric, meaning, it doesn't work. One is technology-centric, meaning that we have to select between kind of one of these two systems, this registry or centralized master process. Another one can be just process and governance-centric, which is a little bit harder because you're really trying to change people's behavior, but really trying to understand how are we mapping this asset from system to system to system.
Do you guys understand the difference there between one's enforced by software, technology, the other's enforced by people? Right? You just make a rule that we'll always name a well like this, and we're going to follow it. And maybe you manage by exception then the quality issues. So you run a cross-reference and you say, what are all the wells that don't follow this naming convention, and you kick those out in a report, and that's sort of how you manage the quality as opposed to having a system actively regulate that.
Right. Each has its pros and cons. Okay, and that gets us to what I referenced to earlier, which is creating.
Let me ask that. Don't you do a little bit of both? Does it come with reality, or do you make more of it?
Yeah, like I said, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. I think you really have to look at what entity is this, how many people does it touch, what attribute are we managing, how often does it change, how volatile is it, right?
Cases
If it's
can't enforce it.
If it's something
It's
like a
software.
spud date, where it's not really a formatting issue, it's really set once, and that is the spud date, unless it's incorrect. It's either incorrect at the beginning, or it should never change, right? The only time it should be right is the first time, and after that there should be one known quantity, like you did in fact spud the well on this date.
Yeah.
So that type of facts level data is, I would handle one way versus well status. That's really more of a discussion, like, what is status? What does it mean to you and your business? Different asset types. Like offshore, you're going to think about status in a very different way than you would in a shale type environment, or even in legacy. If I was a sunset operator, buying P&A worthy prospects off of Exxon for pennies on the dollar and just trying to let them run out. I'm going to look at that data differently in terms of what's important to me, how often does it change, and how many people does it impact. Those are the things that I'd be thinking about. What's the right approach?
So, yes, your point, you have to do a little bit of both, because in some cases there are systems that you simply have no control over. You can't have software write back to the database. Maybe it's in Unidata, right?
So there's a great example.
That's a
There's
great
the gas
example.
world,
Right.
which is super common, which is proprietary databases that you have no real-time write-act. You don't have direct write-through, right? You have a way to just batch in changes, right? But in those cases, again, how do we asynchronously manage this? Is it a daily issue? And there's another thing, time sensitivity, right? Is this like real time, I need this to be correct? Or is this like really, I need to get, by the end of the month, I need everything to kind of get synced up so that I can run my month-end P&L by field, which requires, accounting data, well-to-field map data, so the master data related there.
Right.
And, and it's not a real-time sort of time sensitivity. And it's important that it be right at some single point in time.
Right, one of your other slides was a single copy of the data, and I've been a proponent of that for 100 years. Quite that old. And then I come to places, and everybody traditionally takes a dump out of one system into another system in their cell phone, and they import that into another system. Right. So you're always a day behind. If the dump runs daily, and they go, well, let's just run it hourly. Well, yeah, but it takes an hour and 20 minutes to run.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so this is unfortunately what yields the answer of, well, it depends.
I understand.
There are always ways to deal with it, but it's hard to say without the context.
Yeah.
What's the right?
No, but it's, where we need to start is governance as a concept, common points, and start marching.
I think if you've done these first 5 steps that Chaz described to lead up to these points, the context will be there. Like, it will lead you in a direction. And people have already
From the
established.
previous one, though, the way I heard it was like an either or.
Oh, yeah. I apologize. That's
You
not,
might
it's not an
decide
either or.
literally for this entity, this is how we want to manage it, but for another entity, you want to just manage by exception.
Yeah. So it's just, there are 2 ways, one or the other.
Fair enough.
Well, there's 2 sort of.
It's a
I think
wordsmith.
the 2 main, like, if you went and looked under the covers of what is, like, you were to buy an off-the-shelf master data management tool, and you were looking like, how does it actually operate? How does it deliver on the promise of federating and handling these disconnected systems? It's going to be 1 or 2 of those, right? 1 or both of those basic structures. It takes one philosophy, either that we're going to synchronize across lots of systems, right? This registry approach, aggregate and synchronize, or we're going to physically move to a hub and spoke, right? Which is
Copy all the data.
the centralized master, which is we keep a centralized hub of master data that is the official signed off copy, which may be versioned altogether. In fact, if you look at SQL 2012, this is how SQL 2012's master data management works. Okay, it is a central hub of data, which with a sort of online web access for stewards to go in and approve, and it's versioned as one complete version. So you can decide, okay, we're going to publish this state as the new version, and then it flows back out.
Right.
So it doesn't even flow out in real time. So, and again, there's some gotchas there too, but to give you the basic idea, that's the one on the right.
Okay, so the next step here is creating common representation for these entities. This gets into kind of the guts of what a data architect does, what someone that is modeling the business environment. So you can look to, in various industries, there will be some type of data standard. And in the oil and gas, there's DPDM and there's Energistics, just to name two, that try to kind of capture all of the activities that are occurring in an oil and gas company. But the idea here is that it is a standard representation of these entities, and that will allow you to pull the data in from different places and give it a place to live in some kind of model that you can work with. And in the event that you don't have something that's industry standard, this is where all the work that you've done before in terms of capturing what is the metadata that we care about, what are the nouns that metadata is about, that helps drive this model creation. Okay, so you got the model. You've got everything that happened before that, business processes, data owners, the nouns that we care about. Now it's time to put together some type of centralized repository. And again, I'm not talking specifically about a hub and spoke. Graphic just represents that. It could be this data virtualization piece. It could be this registry piece. It can be a centralized store where data is actually copied in and then pushed back out. But this is the key here is that it has to be accessible and it has to be browsable. So if we create a centralized store and nobody has access to it, meaning I can't physically go as a data store, application owner, or a line of business individual and look at that master data store to see if the data in there is accurate, then I've defeated the purpose of having a centralized store, however that store was created technology-wise. Right? And so making it accessible and browsable is really important, because then you can get buy-in that you're looking for, because now you can say, okay, well, if you're not sure about the data, let's go to the master data store. And why don't you have a look and tell me if the data is accurate? If it's not, then we'll treat that as a root cause kind of activity where we can go figure out why wasn't it accurate. Was it process? Was it system? Was it technology? Was it individual? And then we can really kind of shake that out. Okay, almost to the end here. The next step here is you got this centralized data store. It's great, but if you don't do anything with it, it's yet another data silo. And so we talk about integration, and we're integrating here with the line of business systems, so your ERPs, your CRMs, your accounting, your land management, your drilling, all of those. And when we talk about integrating those systems, we also need to talk about at what level are we going to integrate, at what layer. Is it going to be at the database layer? Okay, that's the kind of the very bottom rung. Is it going to be a services layer? Are these things service oriented? Most of the time in oil and gas software, that's not the case, although big players like Landmark and Schlumberger are moving in that direction. And then you also at the human layer have to create an integration. And then we also talk about integrating the business process. The business processes have to be updated. And that can mean things like, hey, before you go enter a well, make sure that if it's an internal ID that we're managing, that you go to this particular data store and see what the next available well number is, and use that as the record that we're going to use. And that is a business process update that includes the human layer as well.
And we see that kind of stuff in independent operators much more common. If you're going to have 500 wells, I don't know that you want to spend $500,000 figuring out how to handle well number, right? There's a better way. Spend that money somewhere else, doing something that's more impactful. If you're going to have 50,000 wells, that's different, and they're highly volatile. You're buying, selling all the time, right? You might want to. That investment might make more sense. Yeah.
Right. And then lastly, implement governance. So again, going back to the data owners that are responsible for accuracy, timeliness, and quality, and really the completeness of all the data. Deciding on how master data is going to be distributed back to the source systems that's really kind of a systems integration problem. So you can pull it all in, it's great, but how does it get distributed back? Is it going to be manual? Is it going to be automatic? And if there are conflicts, what's going to be your conflict resolution policy? How does that work? Is there a human that needs to be in the loop? So do we need to create notifications for that? Who do those notifications go to? This is part of the governance decision. If it's going to be automatic, are system owners, data owners, people that are using these different systems aware that their data might change out from under them? They might have put in one date and then the next day they check it's a different date. Well, why did that happen? And how do we notify them that that's happened? Again, is it a notification that goes into email? Maybe that's the right approach for the culture. Or is it an exception report that got generated and people looked at on a regular basis? Right? Or got sent to them?
Published to the intranet.
Right.
There's all kinds of ways to disseminate that information. Nowadays, email is not always the best way to get it in front of somebody.
That's right.
It may be, by day 6, when they've gotten it 6 days in a row, they may not read it on day 7.
Yeah.
It starts to become the ignored email that you get every day, and you just
I create a rule for that.
create a
It's
rule and it gets
folder.
sent to some folder that you open once a month.
Right. And then lastly, reporting on key metrics and exceptions. The more visible these things are, the more likely people will change their behavior, because at the end of the day, it's not a technology problem only, it's a technology plus people/process problem. So reporting on key metrics, things like, I've seen this many conflicts. One of the things that we talked to Tonette about in her Lean Six Sigma project is how do you take master data management and craft it in a Lean Six Sigma format? And Six Sigma is all about defects. So a defect can be conflicts that have occurred. Well, why have those conflicts occurred? And we start to report on those and we start to manage those defects and try and drive those defects down as a kind of a Six Sigma improvement initiative. So that's what governance is about. So to wrap it up, your take 2 points away. These are what we want you to take. Data about your assets, those business entities, is also an asset. It is critical to your business. The way that businesses are structured today with data silos and line of business systems, it's completely inefficient, it's costly, both time and money, as well as it doesn't allow you to scale an organization as the organization grows. Master data management is a mechanism to start addressing these symptoms, these problems, but coupling master data management with a real business initiative, something that you can then use to go and talk about return on investment, is key to getting the projects, 1, approved, and 2, continuing to be phased in as you maybe address one key entity and then the next key entity and so on. So it's easier to get the next project when you have a return on investment that you can tie back to a real business initiative that the C-suite is looking for. Okay, thank you very much. And at this point, we'll just open up questions and discussions about anything that you heard here or what's going on in your organization.